This is IShowSpeed, a flag football champion that also just so happens to be one of the biggest content creators in the world.
My mom is kind of homeless. I live with my dad. I want to help her out.
Speed, I'm watching the stream while you try not to laugh, bro. That's disrespectful as shit, bro.
But you see, a lot of people don't know that Speed actually has a different side to him. Because while there are definitely times where he'd be doing crazy stuff like jumping into his computer or even jumping over some speeding cars, but there are also times where Speed could lock in and become a dominant athlete on the field. And even he knows it.
I miss American football. I might play it next year. Yo, Chad, should I play football?
So today I am putting IShowSpeed into College Football 25. Let's just see what happens if he decided to take the sport seriously, as we'll follow him on his road to glory. Now, coming out of high school, Speed was actually more of a soccer player. But you see, the coaches had him down as a 5-star recruit because of his speed. A lot of people don't know that before Noah Lyles ever became a US gold Olympic medalist, one day he actually raced IShowSpeed and it ended up in a tie.
Was that not a tie? That was a tie! I'm the fastest man alive!
Basically, Speed was getting a ton of offers all around the country, largely because of what they felt like he could be as a running back. But being from the city of Cincinnati, Speed knew that he wanted to stay close to home to his mama. And considering that it was one of the schools that gave him an offer, when it came to IShowSpeed's college decision, he decided to sign with Cincinnati. Now, as soon as IShowSpeed got to campus, he told the coaches that he was not rocking with number 24. Apparently, they didn't have his favorite number 7, which he usually wears because of Cristiano Ronaldo. But it was all good though, man, because he decided to rock with number 1 and he was ready to start his college football journey. And as soon as IShowSpeed hit the practice field, he was proving to the coaches that he was faster than everybody else out there. So Speed was feeling real good about himself up until the starting running back sent him this text, talking about how Speed better not thinking about taking his spot anytime soon. And I'm not gonna lie to you, man, it's the exact kind of thing that would make Speed crash out. But instead, he decided to stay calm and react in the way that he usually would. So yeah, the coaches thought that this nigga had lost his damn mind. But it was all good though, man, because the coaches also told him that he will get some playing time in his first college game. So now at this point, IShowSpeed was hyped, and he was ready to get into his first matchup against the UGF Pandas. Hey, and sure enough, the coaches are already putting Speed in the game. His very first play in college football was actually a pass to him, and he damn near picked up the first down. But despite making a play, the coaches had decided to take him off the field, and they didn't put him back in up until late in the second quarter, where they had him out there on wide receiver. Standing at only 5 foot 8 inches tall, the coaches didn't really know what to expect out of him. But it turns out that Speed had a great ability to get open. He brought his team inside the red zone, but once again his coaches decided to take him out the game. And this time it would be till the end of it. But although IShowSpeed didn't get a lot of playing time, he did catch a win in his first ever college football game, 38-7. But when Speed saw that the same running back who was talking crazy to him earlier had just one player of the game, that was definitely making Speed feel a certain type of way. And despite the victory in his first game, he was having a hard time not showing his frustration, because that boy was not fulfilling any of his freshman duties. He was just too focused on trying to make the most of his upcoming opportunities as he was heading into his second game of his career against Pittsburgh. Now this was a game where Speed was getting a little more playing time than he thought he would. Early on, he was able to make a catch, run upfield and say hey, picking up a decent chunk of yardage as he moves his team across midfield. And although he was making some catches out of the backfield, it was when he was lined up at wide receiver where he made his biggest impact. Because regardless of the fact that Speed was starting to make a pretty solid impact in the running game by picking up first downs, none of that would compare to this play where Speed went out there at wide receiver and said, "Wang!" All 5 foot 8 of them snagged that shit off that little boy's head, and IShowSpeed was really starting to look like he could play some ball. The coaches let Speed play a little bit more throughout the second quarter before taking him out the game. But IShowSpeed had definitely helped his team secure a victory as they won 21-16. And although Speed did not win player of the game, he was still pretty happy about his performance, and even decided to go out to a party after the game to rizz up some ladies.
What do you want to say in Hungarian?
Like, yo, you found the show, baby.
Kurva jól nézel ki.
Kurva Delavelski.
It's not really nice to say kurva means whore.
Whore?
Yeah.
You son of a...
So even though things didn't work out for him this time, it was all good though, man, because Speed knew that one day his time will come. Especially with the way that he's working hard to earn that starting spot. Speed has a feeling that he'll get all the baddies in the future. But for now, he has to lock in and try to make a play in his next game against an in-state rival, as Cincinnati is set to face off against Miami of Ohio. They put Speed in the game late in the first quarter to give him a carry, and he went out there and almost picked up the first down. They didn't put him out there again until 2 minutes left in the second quarter, so he was trying to call for the ball anytime he could. This time though, it resulted in a pick, and the defender was able to take it the distance to the house for a touchdown. So definitely not a great start for our guy Speed. They let him play again before the end of the first half, and he went out there and set a blocker, helping to pick up a first down for Cincinnati before being taken off the field again. Unfortunately, in this game, although Speed was getting a few opportunities, he never really got a chance to string plays together. One of his biggest plays of the game, though, was down at the goal line where he got his team just a little bit closer, allowing his team to get across the goal line for a touchdown, ultimately sending this game into overtime where, unfortunately, Miami of Ohio would close it out, taking the W 20-17 in a game where Speed was actually one of the biggest contributors despite having limited opportunities. And after the game, one of the cameras got a glimpse of Speed's reaction to the loss in the locker room. You see, y'all, Speed couldn't stand the fact that he was not the starting running back. He felt like he knew that he was better than this other dude, and that they were only starting him because he was a senior. At this point, man, Speed knew that all he could do was just keep working hard and wait for an opportunity to potentially become the starter one day. In the game against Houston, Speed did not play until the second quarter, but he was out there saying, hey, helping his team pick up big yards and move the chains. They put him out there later in the drive on third down, and Speed was there to make the catch and get into the end zone for his second career touchdown. He is still yet to have a rushing touchdown, but he has proven to be a viable weapon at receiver. Later on in the third quarter, they allow him an opportunity to maybe get that rushing touchdown, and he almost takes it by getting his team down inside the 5-yard line. Unfortunately, they decided to take him out the game after that, but luckily they did score. And on the very next drive, in the same position, Speed was breaking off tacklers and getting his team right back down towards the goal line with the chance to score. And although Speed wasn't the guy to punch it in the end zone, it seems like every opportunity he gets, he's trying to make the most of it before being taken off the field. In the end, though, Cincinnati would find a way to complete the comeback, winning the game 26-21. And since IShowSpeed was playing really well at this point, he was rightfully confused as to why he still didn't have a chance to be a starter going into the following week. So going forward, he decided to just keep working on his skills and hope that he can keep performing better than the starter in their next game against Texas Tech. They put Speed in the game in the first quarter at wide receiver, and he went out there and made a catch that brought his team down to the 2-yard line. And of course, they take him out to allow the starting running back to take all the glory. Either way, Speed was glad that he can go out there and make a play. But on his next opportunity, he would have a chance to make a bigger one, because he was coming up with the catch that brought his team way past midfield, giving them a chance to score a field goal before half. After halftime, this game was tied at 10. And for whatever reason, Texas Tech didn't feel like it was necessary to guard Speed, because almost every time that he got an opportunity, he was not only getting open, but coming up with the catch. And it would only be a few plays later on 3rd and 12 where Speed would snag this ball off this boy's head. And this was actually one of the many catches that Speed was making all throughout this game. And he had done enough to not only get his quarterback over 1,000 yards passing on the season, but also secure another victory for Cincinnati, winning 20-13 in a game where the starting running back had one player of the game. But regardless of that, IShowSpeed just officially had his best game as a college football player, going for 8 receptions and 164 yards. And with such an excellent performance, it was no surprise that Speed would finally get a chance to become the starting halfback. And if you think Speed didn't come to practice 100% locked in, then you are absolutely smoking bath salts, my friend. Speed went out there and dominated the entire practice, officially earning his spot as the #1 halfback for Cincinnati. But now that IShowSpeed has officially won the starting job, he figured he'd go celebrate by heading out to a car show.
What kind of car is this, baby?
Hey man, that's the kind of dog that Speed's gonna need to have if he's gonna lead his team to victories throughout the rest of their season. Cincinnati has some big time matchups on their schedule coming up, including their next one against the top 25 ranked opponent, UCF. Early on in his college debut as a starter, IShowSpeed was showing that he had capabilities of being an excellent running back. And even though he already proved to be an excellent pass catcher, it didn't really help them on this drive as Cincinnati was held to 3 points. Now, one thing about Speed though, man, is that he was not selfish. He was more than willing to pass protect and allow his quarterback time to get the ball downfield. And eventually on this same drive, it would now be IShowSpeed who reaps the benefits of being down at the goal line, as he gets across for his first rushing touchdown of his college football career, one of many that he hopes to get in the future. But in a game where IShowSpeed was absolutely dominant on the ground, coming up with multiple 15+ yard carries throughout this game, it would be no surprise that he found himself right back down towards the goal line, where he punched his way across for another score and ultimately doing enough to effectively put an end to this game. As in his first game as a starter, IShowSpeed helped Cincinnati win 17-7. And for the first time in his career, he finally wins Player of the Game with 147 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he was so proud of his performance, he figured he might as well go try and talk to some more ladies.
Rizmo activated. Yo, you single? You single?
No.
I'm not.
Fuck, bro. Bro, why they don't just say they have a boyfriend when I see him?
Yeah, he got rejected again, man, but at least this time, he had earned himself his first Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week. And the crazy thing is that at this point in the season, he already has more yards than the previous starter, and off less carries. So it started to seem obvious to a lot of people around the country that Cincinnati potentially had a star on their hands. Speed was just hoping to keep up this level of play going into his next game against Arizona State. And on his first carry of the game, IShowSpeed was able to wiggle his way into the secondary, say hey, and he was off to the races. There was nobody who was going to catch him on his way to the end zone for his first touchdown of the game. And even though the following drive was the exact opposite, it was all good though, man, because when you had a guy like IShowSpeed who could catch the ball out of the backfield and completely flip the field in one play, that was going to be invaluable to their success going forward. Especially when he was out there running the ball like this, saying, get off me, just shutting everybody's tackle on the way inside the red zone for Cincinnati. And even though this drive only ended in 3 points, Cincinnati was able to score another field goal by the time the third quarter came around. And with the help of IShowSpeed making the most of every single one of his runs, they were in position to take a lead with a touchdown after Speed bounces off this tackle and makes his way towards the end zone for the score, giving Cincinnati the second half lead. But one thing about Speed was that he was clutch, because when this game had less than 20 seconds left and Cincinnati was behind their own 50, IShowSpeed was making a catch that brought his team well beyond midfield and deep into opposing territory for a chance to win the game. And they sure did, winning 24-21 after hitting the field goal. And once again, your player of the game was IShowSpeed. With 161 yards and 2 touchdowns, it was no surprise that he was starting to get some attention from the girls around campus. The thing about Speed though, man, is that he did not know how to play it cool. So whenever he got asked out to a party, he would start sending double, even triple texts. And y'all might not even believe it, but this dude ended up getting himself blocked. So now, although he is 0 for 3 with women, he was able to win back-to-back Big 12 Player of the Week, and for the first time win a National Player of the Week. But Speed knew that this was really only just the beginning. He felt like he had a real opportunity to become one of the best players in college football, and he had a feeling that he was going to go prove it in his next game against Colorado. Now to start this game off, Speed was running pretty wild. He scored a touchdown to cap off the opening drive of the game, and he played well into the third quarter where he capped off the opening drive of the second half with another touchdown. And it was all throughout the second half where Speed was acting crazy. He not only said hey, but absolutely obliterated this boy's ankle, snapped that shit in half, thank you. And just like that, Speed was on his way towards the end zone for another touchdown on the season, and nobody was there to catch him. He was already in the end zone for his third touchdown of the game. But when he got to this 3rd down and 1 in the 4th quarter, he was able to find another wide open lane towards the end zone for another score, making it his 4th touchdown of the game so far, and he doesn't even know how many yards he has. He just knows that he's cooking these boys up like some shrimp fried rice. And after he takes another handoff later in the 4th quarter that goes for his 5th touchdown of the game, yeah, he had to make sure that he wasn't tripping or nothing because this felt a little too easy. Speed had led Cincinnati to a 42-24 ass whooping on Colorado. And along with his 5 touchdowns, Speed had actually rushed for over 300 yards, obviously earning himself Player of the Game, and it was no surprise that he won National Offensive Player of the Week as well. The scariest part about this was that now that Speed was taking football seriously, all he really wanted to do was just keep improving on his skills and keep performing well. He knew he still had a long season ahead of him, but he was going into the rest of his schedule determined to prove just how dominant he could be. Speed came out here in a game against West Virginia and showed just how effective he can be in the passing game, going for a receiving touchdown with 3 seconds left in the half to put Cincinnati up by 3. Then in the second half, he took this handoff to the right side, and he was able to burst his way outside towards the end zone for a touchdown, coming up with a score that not only extended the lead, but effectively put an end to this game, with Cincinnati coming out with another victory over a top 25 ranked opponent. And even with it being a game where he didn't dominate on the ground, he definitely did through the air. 15 receptions for 132 yards is crazy. Definitely not something you'd expect from a freshman running back, but you can expect that Speed will keep winning Players of the Week. In his next game against Iowa State, IShowSpeed was absolutely cooking these boys up. He somehow found his way in the end zone on this play in the second quarter to give his team the 7-0 lead. And in the second half, he was coming up with big plays like this run where he brought his team inside the red zone. And he even showed his versatility by starting out with his hand in the dirt and still being able to get a touchdown. And he did all of this on his way to another victory as Cincinnati beat Iowa State 17-7. And with another excellent performance from IShowSpeed, he was earning himself another Offensive Player of the Week. Speed was becoming such a well-known player that even Patrick Mahomes wanted to practice with him in his free time.
Bounce my ass. Then come over right, then keep going straight, okay?
I'm glad we don't have a D-line or anything. All right, we got it. There we go, there we go.
Go! Oh my God, man!
Another great thing was that Speed had got his team in position to make the college football playoff. All he had to do was just finish out his season strong over the last few games. His next one being against the number 7th ranked team in the country, Kansas State. And for the first time in a while that Speed can remember, he was struggling a lot in this game. Even when he was making a play like this catch out the backfield, he was still doing too much and fumbling the ball. It wouldn't be till later in the second quarter where he would take this handoff to the left side, say excuse me, and power his way across the goal line for a touchdown, extending Cincinnati's lead to 2 possessions and giving them major momentum going forward. In the second half, it was more of the same with him being able to break off some tackles and work his way towards moving the chains for his team. But with Kansas State failing to score any points throughout this game, all it would take was another touchdown reception from IShowSpeed on the season to put this game away, as Cincinnati shuts out Kansas State 17-0. And this defensive back definitely deserved player of the game with his 3 interceptions, but Speed also had a pretty decent game with 100 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns. But now with the regular season about to come to a close, Speed knows that he's just a couple wins away from getting his team into the college football playoffs. Now this was a game where surprisingly Speed had no major contributions to this offense, as they were able to move their way up into the end zone themselves for half their scores. Other than this one play where Speed had taken his handoff to the outside, ran up the field a little bit before saying hey to a defender, breaking off another tackle and speeding his way towards the end zone for a 98-yard touchdown. And the way that this offense is playing, you guys might think that they're going to go ahead and score 50 this game, but no. Matter of fact, look at this shit. Quarterback keeps the ball in his read option, gets stopped in the end zone for a safety. That's it, game over, they lose. By 2 damn points to an unranked team, Cincinnati loses. Now on the bright side, not only did Cincinnati make it to the Big 12 championship game, but IShowSpeed was actually the leading favorite for the Heisman. He could do something that no other player in this school's history has done, and he could potentially do it on his way to winning a national championship. And this had Speed so hyped, he decided that he was going to try to impress this girl he recently met. But now that Cincinnati had made it to the Big 12 championship, IShowSpeed knew that all he had to do was just lead them to one more victory and they would be on their way to the college football playoffs. Now this one started off a little differently than it did in the previous game against Kansas State, because even though Speed was doing okay, he wasn't doing enough to consistently move the chains for his team. And after he comes up with another short yardage run on first down, his coach actually decides to take him out the game. They didn't put him back in until late in the second quarter, and even when he was making a play, they still decided to take him out the game. They put him back in during the third quarter, but Speed was wondering what the hell was going on and why he wasn't getting more playing time. For now, he was just glad that his receiver could make the catch and make his way towards the end zone for a touchdown to give Cincinnati the lead. But then for some reason, the coaches decided not to put him back in until late in the fourth quarter. And at this point, Cincinnati was somehow down by 2 possessions now. And even though IShowSpeed was starting to make some big plays and get his offense going, the coaches decided to get him out the game during the most crucial moments and put in the old starter, which is probably why Cincinnati went on to lose this game 31-28. And even with Speed having limited touches, he was still the main contributor on this offense. But things would get even worse for Speed because when the award ceremony came around, it turns out that Will Howard from Ohio State won the Heisman. And IShowSpeed was not happy to say the least. I mean, just look at his face, bro. As far as some good news though, he did win the Best Running Back Award, proving that he could be a dominant athlete when taking things seriously. He went on to win a bunch of other awards, and that was cool and all, but when he found out that Cincinnati would not make the college football playoffs and instead would be playing in the Gasparilla Bowl, all Speed could really think about was the fact that they kept taking him out the game. And it's probably the reason why he fell to 3rd place in the Heisman voting after being first just a couple weeks ago. Man, I'll tell you guys what right now, Speed did not know how to feel about all this. It felt like at the most important time of the season, everything just came crashing down. And in the back of his head, Speed felt like there was something fishy going on, but for now, he was just looking forward to playing in his final game of his freshman season as Cincinnati was set to face off against Georgia Tech. Now, unfortunately, in this game, just like the previous one, Speed was being taken out the game for no reason, even on 3rd downs. Soon Cincinnati found themselves down by 14, and anytime Speed was trying to make a play, they just took him right out the game. He didn't really start making an impact until late in the second quarter, but even then they took him out the game immediately after, so it didn't really matter. Because by the end of the third quarter, they were down by 21, and even on plays where it wasn't Speed's fault that the play failed, the coaches still decided to take him out the game. But this time all the way until the end, and of course Cincinnati would go on to lose their final game of the season, losing this one 24-10, but Speed already felt ready to move on. Because as far as this season's stats, he was still the 4th leading rusher in the country, and he also had over 1,000 receiving yards as well. But deep down inside, Speed did feel some type of way. So when the reporters asked him how it felt to take a loss like this and miss out on the playoffs, let's just say he did not hold back.
This shit is so fucking ass, bitch! Turn that shit on! Turn that trash ass fucking.
Now on a positive note, Speed's name was in the Cincinnati record book for the 300-yard game he had early in the season. But later on, Speed would find out that the coaches kept benching him just so that they can get the senior running back some more reps because his career was coming to a close. And that had upset Speed so much that he told the coaches straight up that he's entering the transfer portal. He doesn't want to be a part of a team that's going to take away his opportunities out of pity for others. And now that he has a lot of options to choose from, IShowSpeed is going into his sophomore season of college football looking for a team that can give him a chance to not only win a Heisman, but win a national championship. The last time we saw IShowSpeed playing football, he was losing in another game where he was forced to watch from the sideline because he was benched throughout the entire second half. Hey, you know what, that kind of reminds me of the Gasparilla Bowl, where he lost in the last game of the season because he didn't get no playing time. But despite the loss, IShowSpeed did have an incredible season. He stepped on the field during his freshman season and immediately proved that he could be a dominant player. He had one of the best offensive seasons in the history of Cincinnati, eventually going on to win the best running back award, but he just really didn't like how the season ended.
This shit is so fucking ass, bitch! Turn that shit on! Turn that trash ass fucking.
Which brings us to today, where we are bringing IShowSpeed back to College Football 25 after he found out that his coaches conspiratized against him to pull him out the games. So Speed is now deciding to hit the transfer portal, and he has plenty of options to choose from. Understandably so, considering he is the best running back in the country. He realizes though that he wants to go to a contender, but before he makes his college decision, he has to talk to his family. Basically, he was telling them that he wants to become one of the best football players of all time, and he wants to go to a school that can help bring that out of him. So when it came to IShowSpeed's college decision, he decided to sign with
hit the road, Jack. Hey, don't you come back no more.
Hey, 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 wanna hop on this now suck that now shake that ass.
Now, as soon as Speed got to Georgia, there was another school telling him that they didn't have number 7 available. But it was all good though, bro, because Speed decided 7+1 is good enough, and he got some new drip for the season. So Speed was ready to head into the year and tear up the SEC. But first he had to go out there to practice and prove to the coaches that he could dominate against his own defense. And he was cooking up all preseason. This Georgia defense looked hopeless trying to chase him downfield. And once he saw the kind of line that he had to work with, yeah, he knew he could do something special. And the coaches even told him that he has a chance to break Herschel Walker's season rushing record, and maybe even some receiving records as well, considering that Speed has been training with Sauce Gardner all offseason. And Speed kind of been frying him too, man. It's crazy what he can do on the field. But at this point, Speed's just ready to lock in and get into his first game with Georgia, as they are set to face off against UCLA. To start his season with Georgia, Speed noticed that they had some other good weapons on this offense. None that were quite like him necessarily, as he was able to take a screen pass that could have got blown up at the line of scrimmage and bring it deep into enemy territory down by their red zone. And it wouldn't be long before Speed would cross over the goal line for his first career touchdown with Georgia, giving his team the 7-0 lead heading into the second quarter, where he took this handoff to the right side and brought his team all the way downfield towards the 1-yard line. And he was already setting himself up for his second touchdown of the game in as many quarters. But he loved the way this offense was moving because it wasn't just him contributing. He had some other receivers come up with some big plays to get themselves in the end zone as well. And by the time the third quarter hit, they had a receiver on the opposite side, Landon Humphreys, who also found his way to get across the goal line for a score. And this one would be more than enough to put an end to the first game of the season, as Georgia goes on to beat UCLA 28-7. And even with the low rushing totals from IShowSpeed, he still won player of the game and felt really good about what he was going to do throughout the rest of the season. Because this time he has a coaching staff that believes in him like he believes in himself. But with only 58 yards, he has a long way to go to catch up to the top of the rushing list. But Speed's just looking forward to getting into his next game of the season because it'll actually be his first home game of the year, as Georgia is set to face off against North Carolina. We start this game off with Georgia struggling a little bit throughout the first quarter. But by about midway through the second quarter, Speed was bulldozing his way through a sea of defenders, somehow managing to get across the goal line for the first touchdown for either team, and putting Georgia up by 2 possessions in the process. The rest of this offense began to chime in later as another receiver got across the goal line for a touchdown to extend their lead further. But Speed came out in this game running angry after only having 58 yards last game, and he was letting the other team know about it in between plays. By the third quarter, he was taking another handoff to the right side where he ran up and snatched this one dude's ankle, making his way across the goal line for another score. He had already helped Georgia build a 3-possession lead, but it turns out he was not done yet because at the top of the fourth quarter, he takes a handoff up the gut, and there was a wide open lane straight towards the end zone for a touchdown. They didn't lay a hand on him until he got halfway through the end zone, and IShowSpeed had helped come up with another victory for Georgia. And it was mostly thanks to the efforts of Speed with his 200-plus yard performance and 3 touchdowns. He went on to win SEC and National Offensive Player of the Week. And even though he wasn't on the Heisman list quite yet, he had a feeling that he might be able to get there someday. But first he had to go into a big-time matchup against Texas, who, although unranked, were a highly rated team. Now unfortunately in this game, this Texas pass rush was not playing around, and even with Speed blocking, there was really nothing that quarterback could do. So they decided to hand the ball off to Speed more often, and he was making plays all throughout the second quarter. He helped his team get all the way down the field in position for a score. Where on this 3rd down and 7, the quarterback would ruin it by throwing a pick, taking some well-needed points off the board because by the third quarter, Georgia only managed to have 3 points, they were down by 2 possessions and were failing on 3rd down. Their best hope was to hand the ball off to Speed, where he was absolutely cooking these boys up. He put 3 dudes in the spin cycle on his way to bringing his team down inside the 5-yard line. Let's just take one more look at it real quick. Yeah, that's bad. Speed helped to get across the goal line for a touchdown to bring it back to a 3-point deficit. But after Texas went down the field and scored their own touchdown, and now Georgia's quarterback was coming out here throwing another interception, it's looking like Georgia was about to take their first loss of the season, with Texas going on to finish it off 20-17 in a game where IShowSpeed went for 175 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. And he couldn't help but still feel good about himself despite the loss after winning SEC Offensive Player of the Week. And knowing that he was only just going to get better throughout the season, man, Speed did not have any worries quite yet. He even decided to go out to parties the night before the game because he knew he would come back locked in the next day after having a great night out with his friends.
Go Speed! Go Speed!
We head into this game at home against Ole Miss, where Speed was making his impact felt through the air, as he comes up with a touchdown reception early that puts his team up 7-0 in the first. And then on this 3rd down and 4, still in the first quarter, Speed takes his screen pass to the outside and wiggles his way past every single defender, eventually finding his way streaking towards the end zone for his 2nd receiving touchdown of the game already. And he's letting the whole crowd know that he's coming for that Heisman. The crazy thing is that Speed didn't take his first handoff until the second quarter, and after the offensive line got him into the second level, he was able to make a move towards the outside and get his way up towards the end zone for a score. On his first carry of the day, he was already punching it in. But it wasn't just going to be him who joined in, as another receiver also caught a touchdown, making this game now 35-7, and it looks like it's about to get worse after IShowSpeed front flips into the end zone for a touchdown, barely crossing over the goal line for a touchdown that would already be enough to put this game away. But it turns out Speed has other plans because now back at the 1-yard line, Speed took a handoff and got an excellent block on the left side, and he was able to break loose. There was only one man to beat, but there was no way that Speed was going to let him catch him. And he was on his way towards the end zone for a 99-yard touchdown. Another touchdown for the Georgia Bulldogs means another victory as they go on to win 56-7, blowing out another team in a game where IShowSpeed went for over 250 yards rushing and 6 total touchdowns. An absolute dominant performance where he went for over 100 receiving yards as well, rightfully so earning himself National Offensive Player of the Week. And he had felt really good about the victory, so he decided to take a trip to the zoo.
Dude!
But now Speed was ready to head into another SEC matchup, as Georgia was set to face off against Kentucky. To start this game off, Speed was buying his quarterback time so we can go out there and throw an interception, a turnover that took points off the board and ultimately added points for Kentucky. And this game was definitely getting off to a rough start after the quarterback threw another pick deep in their own territory, leading to Georgia being down by 2 possessions in the second quarter, but Speed was looking to change that. Busting his way to the outside and up the sideline, he was picking up some big yards for Georgia, bringing him inside the red zone where he ended up getting open on his second release and made his way across the goal line for another score. bringing it back to a one-possession game before the half. And after halftime, Speed was taking a handoff to the outside, saw two guys and said, "Excuse me," and then burst his way into the end zone for another score to finally take the lead for Georgia. But then came a 3rd and 2 where Georgia needed a first down to put this game away. And it looked like he was going to get stopped in the backfield, but he not only got a first down, but he said, "Hey, get off me," while bringing his team inside goal-to-goal territory, ultimately leading Georgia to another victory on the season as they go on to win 21-13, all thanks to another 200-yard and 3-touchdown performance from IShowSpeed. And another 100-yard game as a receiver was proving how versatile he could be at his best. He once again won National Offensive Player of the Week, but the cool thing was that Speed had an opportunity to make some music. Now he was definitely down to do it and immediately got to work on a new song. And he wanted to make a song about his favorite things in his life, or at least about something that he was really passionate about. So a lot of people weren't really a fan of it, but I thought it was good. But at this point in the season, Speed was starting to hit his stride. He was really focused on upgrading his skills and trying to become the best football player that he can be. And going into his next game against Auburn and beyond, IShowSpeed was looking to show the whole country that his best was better than everybody else. In a game against the Auburn Tigers, Speed was putting multiple defenders in a spin cycle on his way to leading his team down 2 and across the goal line for a touchdown, putting up points early in a game that was never really much of a game at all, because with Auburn failing to do much of anything on offense throughout the game, and Georgia having a multitude of weapons at their disposal, there was nothing Auburn can do as Georgia would go on to take a 23-10 victory. And it was actually a game where Speed did not have to do much because his offense was playing so well. And as great as that was, Speed definitely wanted to keep putting up his numbers and compete for that Heisman Trophy. So in a game against Tennessee, on the first carry, he broke off a tackler in the backfield, ran up and said, "Hey." And just like that, there was nobody that was going to catch Speed. He was making his way towards the end zone on the very first play of the game. On the next drive, though, he was showing how effective he was as a pass blocker, allowing his quarterback to deliver a shot downfield that winded up getting caught by Landon Humphreys for a touchdown. Speed was proving to be a very multifaceted football player who had the capabilities to do a lot of different things. And at one point, he was playing so well that he had to make sure he wasn't living in a dream or something because things were a little too easy. But with the way Speed in this offense were able to move the ball down the field all game, it was no surprise that they would go on to take the 34-20 victory. And of course, IShowSpeed goes on to win Player of the Game once again, this time with 185 yards on the ground and 1 touchdown. Another 74 yards to add through the air, but the rest of this receiving corps was also doing their thing. Against the DJ Lagway-led Florida Gators, Speed knew that if he keeps performing like this, he might have a chance to get his name in the record books. He came in this game down by 7 before running up saying, "Hey," sending this one dude to the shadow realm before spitting out another dude and bringing his team across the 50. He continued his dominance in the second quarter by taking his handoff to the right side and diving across the goal line to give Georgia the lead. Throughout the entire country, there was no player that could reverse field like IShowSpeed and get himself towards the outside and up the sideline for his touchdown as consistently as he did. And he was already celebrating in the third quarter because he knew that this game was over. Georgia would go on to beat the brakes off of Florida 45-10, in a game where Speed was only 1 yard off of 200 while only having 11 carries. But it was also really cool to see the work the rest of his offense was putting in at this point in the season. In a game against Mississippi State, Speed was back to taking ACLs and getting his team across the goal line for a score to take the lead early on. Now, Speed was definitely doing his thing in this game, but he was doing a lot less than he usually has to, because this was a game where a lot of his other playmakers would come up big, especially later on where a receiver comes up with a touchdown to effectively put an end to this game, with Georgia going on to win 28-10, and it was actually LSU transfer Garrett Nussmeier who won Player of the Game. I would say 100% completion percentage deserves it. Speed, though, still went for over 100 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns. And on top of that, he got an NIL deal to start doing some boxing. And he was definitely down for that. He went out there and said, "Wang, wang, come here, what's up?" Wang, proving that he could be a little bit of a boxer as well. But now at this point in the year, with the weak-ass schedule that they've had so far, Georgia is about to go against their first real test of the year. And after already taking a loss to Texas early in the season, Speed has taken some extra time in his room to make sure that he's prepared going into the game. We start this game off against Alabama with Speed showing just how prepared he actually is, bringing his team inside the 5-yard line, and it would only be a couple plays later that he caught a pass and got his team across the goal line for 6, setting the tone for how Georgia wants to play going forward. But unfortunately, that's just not how it goes, because the quarterback is picked off and is taken to the crib to give Alabama the 10-7 lead. But Speed is doing his best to make sure that his team does not go out like that. So on this 3rd down and 1, he helps bring his team to the 10-yard line, and a few plays later on another 3rd down, he leaks out to the flat and catches the pass before powering his way in the end zone for a touchdown. giving Georgia the lead in this game that Alabama would immediately take right back in the second half. But Speed was once again helped leading his team down towards scoring position, and he would end up getting across for another receiving touchdown before the end of the third quarter, not only giving his team the lead, but allowing them the chance to close the game out later on in the fourth quarter. But after getting stopped in the backfield, it looks like Alabama might have a chance to get the ball back and win the game. And that definitely could have happened if Georgia's offensive line didn't part the Red Sea and allow Speed the chance to race towards the end zone for another score, this one to put an end to the biggest game of their season so far, as Georgia goes on to take care of business 28-16. And shout out to IShowSpeed with 150 yards on the ground and 4 touchdowns. He won himself another Player of the Week, and with the final 2 regular season games coming up, he was still working towards trying to be good enough to win that Heisman Trophy, and maybe even get his name into the record books. He started off this game against Charlotte pretty much where he left off in his previous game, getting across the goal line for a score, hauling in a reception that gave Georgia the 7-0 lead, but Charlotte went down the field and tied it right back up at 7. Unluckily for Charlotte though, they had to go up against a team that had weapons all over the field and could take it the distance on any given play. So after Landon Humphrey gets across the goal line for his touchdown, a receiver on the other side said now it's his turn, and he catches this ball over the top before eventually making his way in the end zone for a score, giving Georgia the 21-7 lead. But after Charlotte gives Georgia great field position on their next drive, now it's just IShowSpeed's turn to get back in the end zone, but this time on the ground, as he goes in for a short rushing touchdown to extend the Georgia lead. But the way that Speed was running all throughout the second half, you would almost think that this is like a form of bullying or something, because there were times where he had the wide open lane to score, but still run across the goal line just to tease Charlotte. And it seemed like they were a little bit scared of him based on how he was talking in between plays. And even though Georgia could have just ran out the clock, Speed was not trying to do that. He was trying to absolutely embarrass Charlotte and show the country that he was the best player in college football. And it was hard not to think so after seeing what he did today. Georgia would go on to win 52-7. And IShowSpeed goes on to win Player of the Game with 5 touchdowns and over 200 yards rushing. He did not get the rushing yards record yet, but he did get the rushing touchdown record and even got the reception record as the running back. And that kind of goes to show just how great Speed is as a player, considering all the weapons that they have on their team. He felt amazing about how things had gone up to this point, so he was just going to close things out in this last game of the regular season on the road against Georgia Tech. And this turned out to be a pretty simple game, with Speed making a catch to get in the end zone for a score early, taking a 7-0 lead right before halftime. But to close out the third quarter, Speed was making another catch to get his team across the goal line to extend their lead, and that had already done enough to put this game away, as Georgia goes on to beat Georgia Tech 20-7 in the last game of the regular season. And Speed had another game where he went for over 100 all-purpose yards and multiple touchdowns. Now it turns out that Georgia is going to be playing against Texas in the SEC Championship game. And on top of that, IShowSpeed found out that he is actually in first place to potentially win this Heisman. All he has to do is help beat out Texas, who actually has a bye week right now heading into the playoffs. So now going into the SEC Championship game, IShowSpeed's mission is very clear. Beat Texas, get the bye week, get the Heisman, and then get the national championship. We start this game off against Texas, where Speed is pass protecting and he is blocking his life off, giving his quarterback enough time to get the ball out, and the tight end is somehow able to fight his way across the goal line for 6, getting the scoring started early in the first quarter for Georgia, and that's exactly what they need. By the end of the first quarter, Speed is still pass protecting for his quarterback, and he comes up with another big throw. The receiver hauls in a catch before making his way downfield and eventually being tracked down inside the 10-yard line, leading to a play where Speed was able to wiggle his way across the goal line for a touchdown to make it a 2-possession lead. Now in the second half though, Texas's defense started to play a little bit better, and Speed kind of got a little bit worried because he remembered that Texas is Georgia's only loss on the season. But by the end of this game, it came down to Georgia needing a couple more first downs, and Texas was starting to call their timeouts. And after this play where Speed said, "Excuse me," ran up the field a little bit before saying, "Hey," he had officially helped seal the deal for Georgia and already send them to the second round of the college football playoffs, with Georgia going on to close this game out 17-14, thanks to another excellent performance from IShowSpeed on the ground. But with Georgia now winning the SEC Championship, that means that the season is over and it's time for some awards to be given out. And IShowSpeed would go on to win not only Player of the Year, but become the first Heisman winner for the Georgia Bulldogs since Herschel Walker in 1982, and also broke Herschel Walker's record with 2,013 rushing yards and 25 touchdowns. Speed absolutely dominated all season long, and it should be no surprise to anyone that he would go on to win a bunch of other awards. But now that he's finally won the Heisman Trophy, it's about time to go win that national championship trophy. And going into their first game of the college football playoffs, It turns out that Georgia's going to be playing a familiar opponent. As for the third time this season, and in back-to-back games, Georgia is set to face off against the Texas Longhorns. Now in a game that felt like an extension of last week, it didn't take too long for Speed to get across the goal line for a score, putting up the first points on the board for either team in this playoff game. But on this 3rd down and 6 late in the second quarter, it turns out that those would be the only points that Georgia would put up throughout the first half after this pass falls incomplete. As a matter of fact, we head all the way to the 4th quarter, and Georgia is now losing and not able to convert on 3rd down. Luckily, they were in position to tie the game up though, and the defense was now giving them a chance after coming up with the stop. But now backed up on their own goal line, Georgia needs somebody to make a play. And of course, IShowSpeed is there to not only get them out from within their own end zone, but down towards their opponents. And after the offensive line creates a hole for him to wiggle his way into field goal range, Georgia would go on to win this game 13-10, solidifying their spot into the next round of the playoffs. And they could definitely be thankful that they have Speed, who put up another 100-yard game. Speed was still working towards becoming the best that he could possibly be, but he knew that it would all be worth it if he could continue playing as well as he has and help his team find a way to catch a W in their next game against Clemson. Now, things did not start out well for Georgia as they were down by 14 in the second quarter. But before the end of the half, Speed would catch the screen pass, run up a little bit, say, "Hey, skip-a-doo-bop, excuse me," and make his way towards the end zone for a score, bringing his team within a 1-possession deficit. And after they get the ball back in the 3rd quarter, they finally have some other playmakers who are showing up too. Eventually, they were able to make it down to the goal line where Speed reversed field and was able to just power through everybody for a touchdown, now tying this game up at 14 before Clemson takes the lead back in the 4th quarter. So now with the clock winding down, Speed knows that he has to make some plays through the air. And he makes one here on his corner route as he catches the ball, spins out a defender, and brings his team across midfield. Another catch from a big-time receiver would bring him down to the goal line, allowing Georgia to hand the ball off to Speed and get in the end zone for a score, tying this game back up at 21. But of course, Clemson was able to go down the field and take the lead right back. But now with less than 30 seconds left, Georgia is in desperate need of somebody to make a play. But somehow Speed is not only able to get his team in field goal range, but potentially even in position for a touchdown. He caught a pass up the seam where he almost got across the goal line for the lead. But with the clock now under 10 seconds left, he had to get back on the ball quick in order for a chance to score a touchdown. And this time a handoff was all it would take, as IShowSpeed leaps over the goal line for Georgia, taking the lead in this game with 3 seconds left and sending them to the national championship, as Georgia goes on to win this game 28-24. And even in a game where Speed did not do a lot on the ground, he still kind of did a lot by getting all 4 of Georgia's touchdowns. IShowSpeed has been a dominant football player over the past 2 seasons, but now in his sophomore year, he has 1 more game left to potentially cement his legacy in college football glory forever. Now, Ohio State actually gave Georgia great field position to start this game, and IShowSpeed was doing his best to take advantage of it. And eventually he capped off this short opening drive with a touchdown to give his team the lead early on the next drive with the game back tied at 7. Speed somehow avoided being tackled in the backfield, and even though he was getting chased on this play, he was still able to bring his team down to the 5-yard line, setting himself up with another simple handoff to the right side where he got across the goal line for another score, giving Georgia now the 14-7 lead. And even though people thought that this game might be a shootout, the only one that seems to be shooting so far is Georgia. Because after Ohio State fails to score again on their next drive, Garrett Nussmeier found a guy down the left sideline who brought it across the goal line for a score, giving Georgia the now 2-possession lead. Now Ohio State started to fight back a little bit by getting a field goal, but all that was about to not matter after Speed makes 1 cut, and all of a sudden he's able to help move his team in position for a field goal, allowing Georgia to go up by 14 at the half. But after halftime, more excellent field position given by Ohio State allows for a Garrett Nussmeier touchdown to the back of the end zone to the tight end. But with Georgia now getting the ball back up 21, and IShowSpeed is still running the rock like this, even jumping over players, when he was out there taking flight over these little dudes. And speaking of flight, that's probably what he used to do when the cameras weren't on. By the way, man, it would only be a couple plays later that Speed would reverse field and find a way to punch his way in the end zone for another touchdown. Not only doing enough to win Georgia another national championship, but cement his own legacy forever. IShowSpeed helps the Georgia Bulldogs win the national championship. And with another 200+ yard performance and 3 touchdowns in the biggest game of the year, of course he goes on to win player of the game. They opened the whole can of whoop-ass on Ohio State 51-17, proving how dominant they can be with a guy like Speed on their team. And in a lot of ways, Speed always knew that he was meant to be a dog. As far as season stats, Speed rushed for over 2,400 yards and 31 touchdowns. And that's not even to mention 123 receptions and 1,200 yards through the air. And with 11 more touchdowns, that brings him up to over 40 for the season. And forget Georgia, man, IShowSpeed had proved to be the most dominant rusher in the history of the SEC. as he now holds multiple single-season records for rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. But although Speed is very appreciative of his teammates, especially his quarterback, who transferred in during his senior year to help deliver a championship, Speed still had thoughts of potentially transferring to another school where he could build his brand and potentially break all-time records. The last time we saw IShowSpeed, he decided to sign with Georgia after finishing off a great freshman season with Cincinnati, and I think it's safe to say that Speed would fit right in with the Bulldogs, because he would turn out to be a dog off and on the field, eventually proving that he was the best player in the country by not only winning the Heisman Trophy, but he would also lead his team to the national championship, where against Ohio State, he absolutely balled out and helped his team win a title, bringing the Georgia Bulldogs to the top of the college football world. But Speed was not quite done yet, because in his final season of college football, he led them right back, where in a game against Tennessee, Speed was going absolutely crazy. And soon Tennessee realized that there was no way that they could stop him, as he led Georgia to back-to-back national titles, and officially established himself as one of, if not the greatest Georgia Bulldog of all time, as he went on to break multiple Georgia records including rushing touchdowns and receptions. But after a career where IShowSpeed had dominated from start to finish, it was clear that it was time for him to move on to the next level. So eventually he decided to forego his senior season and enter his name into the NFL draft. And now that Speed is ready to take his athletic ability to the professional level, he is out here in Indy ready to take care of this NFL Combine, where it's pretty clear that he's still got that dog in him, because he came out here and pretty much dominated the speed and quickness drills. He even did a good job in the broad jump, where he jumped further than anybody at his position. So he did have a pretty good draft combine. But now he had to go ahead and deal with his pre-draft interviews, where he thought that he was going to do pretty well. But it turns out that Speed did trash, earning himself a 1 out of 10, and now it seems like he might end up as a mid-first round pick. It turns out that Speed didn't know the answer to any of these questions, so eventually he got overwhelmed and started barking at the reporters. Yeah, it was a whole big thing in the media afterwards, and a lot of people felt like Speed was about to fall in the NFL draft. But when it came time for draft day, Speed was not waiting in the green room too long before the Arizona Cardinals would call him, letting him know that they wanted him out there in Arizona, and that with the 13th overall pick, they would be selecting him in the NFL draft. And honestly, man, Speed was out there wanting to do a backflip out there, but he just didn't want to mess up his suit. He was so happy though that he was finally becoming a professional athlete, and it would actually be his 3rd straight team where he gets to wear the color red. But after signing with the Arizona Cardinals, it actually becomes the first time where he gets to wear the number 7. Finally, he's able to wear the same jersey number as his favorite athlete of all time. But as excited as Speed was to finally make it to the league, he knew that it was time to get back to work. And he's out there letting the coaches know that he's going to do everything he can to help turn this team around. And it wasn't too long after where he was finally getting to the preseason, where in his NFL debut, IShowSpeed would be matched up against the New Orleans Saints. Now, it only took a couple carries for Speed to show that he was going to be a dangerous weapon for this offense. The coaches only left him in there for a couple plays, but honestly that was good enough. By the end of the first quarter, they were ready to take him out, and the Cardinals would go on to win this game 14-0. As Speed now got a little bit of preseason action, and he was feeling good going into the regular season. But the thing is that now that Speed is a professional athlete and has all this clout and attention around him, he got a lot of his teammates out there trying to be his best friend. They out here trying to come on stream and go to Indonesia and all this other stuff. But it's crazy because they ain't the only one that he has to deal with.
We not about our shit, all right?
We do this. You can buy this.
We not about no.
As friends.
Regardless though, Speed was honored to be playing for this team. And eventually he was ready to finally get his career started, where in his first NFL game, the Cardinals would be on the road to match up against the Buffalo Bills. Now early on it became very clear to Speed that the NFL level was just very different from college. The Cardinals offense was struggling so much throughout the first half that Speed had negative rushing yards after 5 carries. So eventually they decided to deploy him more as a receiver, where he did come up with some pretty good plays. But by the end of this, with it still being 7-0, this Cardinals offense just could not get it together, as Kyler Murray throws a pick that results in the Cardinals losing their first game of the season. Now, it was obviously not a great way to start Speed's career, but he felt good about how he played. At the end of the day, though, he was one of the people who had to answer for the loss, but he did not make any excuses, man. He was ready to use this loss as motivation. And the following week, he was working real hard to build up his skill as he was heading into his 2nd game of his career, where in this one, he would be playing his first home game against a division rival, the Los Angeles Rams. Unfortunately, in this one, it was pretty clear that this offense had not started clicking yet. And it wouldn't be until the 4th quarter on a pass to Speed where he came up with not only his first touchdown of his career, but this would actually be the first touchdown of the Cardinals season. So IShowSpeed knew that he had to try and do a backflip.
Darren!
Unfortunately though, this game would result in another loss, as the Rams end up taking this one 17-10. And despite the fact that Speed had another decent game for a rookie at least, it was safe to say that the vibes in the locker room were not very good, as it was clear that no one was a fan of this team starting off 0-2. And although Kyler Murray had changed his number just so we can be number neighbors with Speed, Speed was not happy with the way that things were going right now with the team. And it didn't really change too much going into a game against Detroit, where although once again Speed would be the guy who came up with a big play, coming up with a catch for a touchdown to bring this game within 3 points. By the end of it, with Arizona now down by 2 possessions, another interception from Kyler Murray would go on to put an end to this game, as the Cardinals are now starting their season off 0-3, and so far they've put up a total of 17 points, 14 of them being from IShowSpeed. But after multiple weeks of this offense being one of the worst in the league, Kyler Murray and Speed were trying to find ways to turn this team around. So Speed realized that maybe he has to spend more time in the gym, and he actually started to bulk up a little bit.
W or L bulk. W or L. I've been bulking, chat. W or L. L?
Either way though, Speed was locked in, man, and he was ready to get into his next game, where he might have a chance to help his team win their first game of the year. Early on, this Cardinals offense was not doing too well, as someone on defense actually decided to say Shabaka to Speed and put an end to their opening drive. In the second quarter though, with this game tied at 3, Speed started to say, excuse me. They really started putting the moves on people, bro. He had people in a blender. And it felt like the Cardinals might have a lot of momentum going forward in this game. But literally on the next play, Kyler Murray throws a pick, and this one would be taking the distance all the way to the end zone for a touchdown, now putting the Commanders up by a possession before on the very next drive, Kyler Murray would find Speed wide open on the right side of the field, where there was nobody in front of him to stop him from going across the goal line for a touchdown, putting up a score that would tie this game up for the Cardinals, and now it feels like they might have a chance to really do something. And that feeling would grow even more as they got the ball back in the fourth quarter tied at 10. But with IShowSpeed on fire, he was able to get the team in field goal range. And despite the fact that they would eventually get stopped on third down, they had already done enough to secure their first win of the season, coming up with a victory against the weak-ass Washington Commanders. And IShowSpeed had an excellent day, going for over 150 yards total on offense and scoring a touchdown. But even after finally getting their first win, Speed was not complacent. He knew he had a long season ahead of him, so he kept his head down and stayed working hard. He just hoped that the Cardinals will be able to keep things rolling in their next game on the road against the San Francisco 49ers, where once again it seems like the Cardinals are back to being as bad as they were in the first 3 weeks. Because by the end of this game, they actually had a chance to go down and win it. But Kyler Murray throws a pick, which wasn't necessarily on him because Speed did call for the ball, but it would eventually result in another loss on the season. And unfortunately, the losing would not stop there, as another bad game against the Green Bay Packers results in a 7-10 loss. And with the Cardinals now tied with the very bottom of the league, IShowSpeed knew that he had to put in some work crafting his skills going into the following game, where against the Chargers, Speed actually came out here and played pretty well. He had one of his best days on the ground in this one, but the Cardinals would still go on to lose, going down to the Chargers by 1 point. And despite the fact that Speed looked happy after the game, he had actually reached his lowest point. I mean, he had never lost so much in his career since he was playing the other kind of football. But he and his coach agreed that it was finally time to turn things around. They had to do something, and Speed knew that his offense just was not doing enough. So he did the only thing that he can think of and hit up the greatest player of all time, as he met up with Tom Brady and asked him some tips on how to get back on track. And now, so you can tell by Speed's face that he's excited to get back on the field. But first he knows that he has to upgrade his skills a little bit more, and then also he talked to the coaches. They told him that the new jerseys they got are weak as hell and they gotta go back to the old ones. And it turns out the coaches agreed. So it seems like the Cardinals were finally on the same page going into their next game against the Dolphins. Now early on in this game against Miami, the Cardinals were looking different. They handed the ball off to Speed to the left side where he said, excuse me, just absolutely breaking these two dudes' ankles. And I don't know where he was off to the races towards the end zone for a touchdown, putting up a score on his first carry of the day. And the Miami Dolphins felt like they might be in for a long day. Now, at this point in the season, Speed was one of the leading running backs in receiving yards. But in this game, he was really showing off how good he was as a running back, as he was having his best day on the ground so far. But it also wasn't just him, because Marvin Harrison Jr. would actually start showing up big for the first time all season, bringing the team down to the goal line where on the next play, Speed comes up with his second touchdown of the game, giving the Cardinals one of the only leads that they've had all season. Well, right before Miami would tie it back up. But the way this Arizona offense was moving today, it did not surprise anybody that Speed got wide open downfield And once again, he was on his way downfield for what could be a touchdown before he does some spin move, and yeah, I don't know why he did that.
Stupid.
But it was all good because a couple plays later, he crossed over the goal line for a touchdown that not only gave Arizona the lead, but did enough to give them their second win on the season. The Cardinals will go on to win this one 21-14. And IShowSpeed had his best day of his NFL career so far, with over 150 yards rushing and 87 yards receiving with 3 touchdowns. The reporters were looking forward to talking to him after the game, but not as much as his teammates were looking forward to celebrating. They had truly felt like they had turned over a new leaf on the season, but the only way to find out would be by seeing what happened in their next game against the Chicago Bears, where once again Speed was making his impact felt as a receiver by saying hey, and picking up big first downs after the catch. And I don't know if y'all hear that, but Speed's out there talking crazy to opposing players. The Cardinals would eventually get down to the goal line where Speed would hop right over for a touchdown, putting up a score that gives his team the lead and a ton of momentum going forward. Because by the end of this one, the Bears still had no points, and Speed was getting across the goal line for another touchdown that had done enough to put an end to this game, as the Cardinals would take down the Bears 14-8, led by an even better performance on the ground than Speed had the previous week, putting up 175 yards in a game that brings the Cardinals from the bottom of the NFL all the way towards the middle of the NFC. But just because the Cardinals had won a couple games in a row does not mean Speed can get complacent, especially when he's still not even a top 5 rusher in the league. So going forward, he knows that he's going to have to put a lot more work on the ground. And that all starts as the Cardinals head into their next game against the New York Jets. Now in this game, it took all the way to the end of the first half for the Cards to get down to the goal line and score their first touchdown, tying this game up at 7 before coming back in the third quarter. We're now down by 3. Speed was out there saying hey, and picking up big first downs for the Cardinals. He helped bring them down to the red zone where he found himself wide open down the left side, and he easily got his team across the goal line for a score, now taking the lead in a game that would ultimately come down to the final minute. And with this clock ticking down, the Cardinals knew that they had to make a play. So they swung Speed out to the right side where Kyler Murray would find him wide open, hitting him in stride as he's easily able to cross over the goal line for another score. And just like that, he had helped the Cardinals win their 3rd game in a row, beating the Jets 21-17 in a game where Speed went for over 100 yards on the ground once again. But despite the fact that the Cardinals were on a little bit of a win streak, the grind was not going to stop there. Even during their bye week, they were out there working hard, and Speed was doing a great job leading his team. Speed had grown a lot so far throughout his rookie season, but he felt as locked in as he's ever been going forward throughout the rest of the year. And he felt confident that the Cardinals might be able to keep their win streak alive going into their next game against the Seahawks. And in this game, it seems like his confidence was paying off, because although he was having a rough day on the ground, by the end of this one, he was able to get his team across the goal line to take the lead, eventually pushing this game into overtime, where after the Seahawks failed to score, all Speed had to do was just lead his team into field goal range. And once he had done that, he had helped his team come away with their 4th straight victory, as the Cardinals had beat another divisional rival in a close game, and all of a sudden the national media wanted to talk about Arizona. It was clear that Speed had been the key for their turnaround, but they were still far away from the playoffs, and they knew that if they wanted any chance at postseason life, they would have to find a way to keep their streak alive going into their next game against the Vikings, where early on in this one, IShowSpeed was looking as motivated as ever. This man was out here snatching people's ankles while bringing his team down to the 1-yard line, where a play later, it was actually Kyler Murray who would take this read option and cross over the goal line for a score, giving the lead to the Cardinals in a game that they would maintain all the way till the second half, where IShowSpeed was absolutely balling out and frying his defense like those chicken wraps at Popeyes, coming up with his 2nd touchdown of the day, and officially bringing his team's winning streak to 5 games, as the Cardinals will close this one out 21-14. And at this point, the Cardinals were just simply on a roll. They came out here in a game against the Seahawks led by IShowSpeed, where he got him across the goal line for a touchdown before the end of the first half, finally giving them the lead in this game. But they would get the ball back with 30 seconds left, and Speed, now with his X Factor, was out there looking absolutely unstoppable. This dude was out there bringing his team inside the 5-yard line, where just a play later he got flipped over the goal line for a score, putting up some more points in the game that ultimately led to another victory on the season, winning this one 17-0. And out of nowhere, Arizona is 7-6 on the year, finally putting them above 500 for the first time all season. And it was mostly due to their superstar rookie who was working hard on and off the field. And Speed was really out there taking no days off, bro. One day he even decided to meet up with Deshaun Watson just to see if he could jump over him. See, that's harder than y'all think. Probably not as hard as rushing for over 1,000 yards on a season, which IShowSpeed did not really care about. He already knew that he was going to hit those numbers, just like he knew that he could lead his team to the playoffs, where for the first time all year, it looks like they actually have a chance to make it. But not just that, because they might also have a chance to win their division. IShowSpeed was helping his team pull off one of those Indiana Pacers comebacks, just kind of spread out all throughout the season. But they felt like if they wanted a chance to actually win their division, they're going to have to keep winning as they head into their next game against the New England Patriots. Now, by the end of this one, the Cardinals have found themselves in a position where they finally made it back downfield, and Speed was breaking people's ankles on his way to the end zone for a score, putting up some points that, instead of winning the game, actually resulted in it going to overtime, where after the coin toss, the Patriots end up winning it, which ultimately resulted in New England winning this game, as the Cardinals didn't even get to touch the ball in overtime in a game that they lost 23-17. But at this point, it seemed to be an acceptable loss as the Cardinals were still 7-7 on the year, and led by Speed, who was now the second leading rusher in the league. Well, based on a lot of the team's record from the NFC, it looks like the Cardinals might have a chance to go from out of the playoffs to potentially even getting the #1 seed. In order to do that though, they would definitely have to finish the year out undefeated, all starting in their next game on the road against the Carolina Panthers. And in this game, it was clear to the entire stadium that Speed was not playing around, as early on he went out there and jumped over a dude, broke off a tackle, and he was gone. Speed jumped over this dude like he jumped over that Lamborghini that one time, and just like that, this man was in the end zone, already doing enough to put another W in the team's win column, closing this one out 12-0, and you could just tell that this team felt like they were really about to get back on track. They came out here in a game against the Rams where at one point they were stuck on their own 1-yard line, but it seems like all they had to do was just hand the ball off to Speed, because one carry up the middle and he was gone. This man Speed was on his way to a touchdown, but he was also on his way to leading his team to another win, as they would close this game out 14-0. And out of nowhere, when you look at the playoff picture, it looks like the Cardinals might actually make the playoffs. But sitting at the 6th seed, they have a chance to not only lock their seed in, but they still might have a chance to claim the #1 seed if they can come away with the victory in their last game of the year, where at home they'll be set to face off against the 49ers. Where despite the fact that Speed was not having a great day so far, all that would change with one carry, where out of nowhere he is able to break loose, and just like that he is off to the races, getting his team across the goal line for a touchdown, and it looks like him and Marvin Harrison got a little celebration going on. Probably because they know that they've already done enough to close out the regular season, as the Cardinals will win this game 14-7, and it looks like they did a little more than just win their division, as it turns out that they did get the 1 seed. They went from one of the worst teams in the league halfway through the year. This man IShowSpeed had shocked the league so much by leading this team to the playoffs that they actually decided to make him the cover of Madden 26, becoming the first rookie to ever grace the cover in his following season. And he seemed like the best choice considering that he was the first rookie since 1978 that went on to win the Offensive Player of the Year, last done by running back Earl Campbell. But at this point, man, Speed's fame was growing so large that he was able to just drive around town and get random gifts from his fans.
Open that shit. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it.
Fuck is
You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it.
Wait, guys.
You're gonna love it. Woo, 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 woo. Come here, motherfucker.
And you know what, man, going into the playoffs, he knew that he could not let down his loving and caring fans. All he had to do was just keep the Cardinals locked in going into their first playoff game against the New Orleans Saints. Now, early on in this one, it actually wasn't Speed making big plays, as Marvin Harrison Jr. comes up with a catch. And out of nowhere, he was able to turn it upfield and break away from the entire defense, bringing his team upfield for a touchdown, putting up a score in the first half that seemed to have opened the floodgates for Arizona. Because by the end of the first half, IShowSpeed was out there wide open, and he was out there celebrating his way across the goal line for another score to extend the Cardinals' lead. And by the end of this one, with the Saints still having 0 points, and with Speed going for his second touchdown of the day, the Cardinals had officially earned themselves a ticket to the NFC Championship game, after blowing out the Saints 21-0 in a game where Speed went for over 100 yards on 16 carries. And honestly, the whole year Speed knew that he would be able to get his team to this point. He didn't lose much throughout his football career, and he didn't plan to lose much more after starting the year 1-6. So Speed already had a feeling that no matter who he played in the NFC Championship, yeah, they were getting to the Super Bowl. But when he found out that he was about to play against the Dallas Cowboys, yeah, the Cowboys ain't getting back to a championship anytime soon, bro. The Cardinals win this one 21-13, and this was, of course, in another game where Speed went out there and absolutely balled out. But what was crazy, though, is that this team had literally started this year off trash as hell. And I don't know where they just turned it on and finished the year 9-1, earning themselves the #1 seed in the right to face off against the #1 team in the league, the Kansas City Chiefs. We're in the Super Bowl. IShowSpeed made it clear that he did not come here to lose. This man Speed came out here on his first carry and swerved out the entire defense before gliding downfield for a touchdown. There was nobody who was going to stop him as he crossed over the goal line for a touchdown, and honestly, bro, he couldn't even believe that he was doing this against the best team in the league. Somehow, though, he was finding a way to get it done. This team was only just getting started, because by the end of the first first half, he was out there making his presence felt as a pass catcher, and he was still out there snapping people's ankles while picking up a first down, bringing him down to the goal line where he picked up another score, giving his team the lead before going into the second half, where unfortunately on this play, a fumble from his teammate would actually turn this game around, seemingly giving the momentum to the Chiefs as they would eventually go up by a score. And now by the fourth quarter, it looks like the Cardinals might be in trouble, but Speed was trying to change that. He brought them down to the goal line where on this play, he jumped and fought his way over for a touchdown, damn near body surfing his way across for a score that ties this game up. But now we just have to see if the Chiefs are able to put some points up, which eventually they can't, meaning that this season would come down to the final minute of this game. And thanks to the Cardinals star players, they were able to get their team downfield, starting with Speed on a catch that got them across the 50, bringing them to 3rd down and 6 where Marvin Harrison would come up with the catch, putting the Cardinals in field goal range with no timeouts left. So after this play, they got to immediately rush everybody off the field and bring on their field goal unit. And with 3 seconds left, they just barely get this snap off, and the field goal is good! The Cardinals make the most insane season comeback in NFL history, winning this game 24-21, and most of it is because of their superstar running back IShowSpeed, who at this point has already become the Arizona Cardinals' greatest running back in the history of their franchise. This man IShowSpeed in one season has become a legend, and he will always be remembered for this season after winning an Offensive Rookie of the Year, an Offensive Player of the Year, and a Super Bowl MVP. Now, Speed had played so well this season that there was an abnormal amount of defensive players who retired. Turns out they didn't want to deal with Speed after he put up 1,400 yards on the ground with 15 touchdowns. Not to mention he put up 940 yards as a receiver, all in his rookie year. This dude IShowSpeed was absolutely different, and at this point he felt amazing about going forth throughout the rest of his career and potentially even ending up as the GOAT of football, kinda just like his favorite athlete of all time. But this was the story of IShowSpeed playing football. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to get this one to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. Also be sure to comment down below what else you guys want to see next, and YouTube thinks you'll like one of these other stories until the next one comes out. If you got to this point, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend, and other than that, I'm gonna catch you guys next time.